3 men were convicted of killing 15-year-old John Melbourne Jr. of Harrison, but only one man, Jason McGehee, was put on death row for the kidnapping, beating, torture, and murder. We sat down with 2 of Melbourne's 4 sisters who say it destroyed their lives.
People say it's supposed to bring you together when you have a tragedy, but in my family, it tore us apart.
After their older brother, John Melbourne, was kidnapped and killed 20 years ago, sisters Letitia Fott and Clemency Melbourne say their parents divorced and they were taken by DHS.
We were abused in foster care. The foster care parents were very abusive to me and my brother.
Both women say the men convicted took their protector.
It affected not only, like just John being gone, it affected all of us in so many ways to where it could have been fixed.
But they don't agree on whether Jason McGehee, the only man put on death row over John's murder, should be put to death.
I don't think they should lose their son. They didn't ask for it. It's not going to do me any good to know that another human being is going to die.
Letitia says there is too much of a gray area on McGehee's actual role in John's death.
I don't know the truth, obviously, if they keep recanting their stories.
And
I don't think John would want him to be executed. I just want the truth. I just want to know what actually happened to my brother and why. Why did you do this to someone that you called a friend?
But Clemency's views are different.
We know from right from wrong, and he chose wrong. He chose to take a life, and he has to pay for what he did.
For her, McGehee's execution would be the only justice.
It's been over 20 years. We want peace. We want closure. We want to be over. We want this over and done with.
I did speak with John's father, John Melbourne Sr., who agrees with Clemency. Death is the only option to get justice. But I also spoke with another sister who agrees with Letitia that McGee's life should be spared. That is what John would have wanted. Una Lee, 4029 News.
The Arkansas State Board recommended clemency for the Boone County man. 4029's Una Lee spoke with McGehee's father about his son on death row.
Every day is tough for Jackie McGehee. He has spent 2 decades praying for his son.
He's a very educated, sweet kid, and that's all there is to it.
Jackie McGehee found these photos of his only son, Jason McGehee.
I talk to him once in a while, and I try to go down there what I can.
Tonight we have team coverage for you. Katie Davidson will tell us about the executions and how they're being challenged in court.
And 4029's Brett Rains, who we're going to start with now, is in Little Rock and was at those protests today at the Capitol. Brett?
The rally was organized by the Arkansas Coalition to abolish the death penalty. Today, they submitted more than 150,000 signatures to the governor to try and petition him to stop the upcoming executions.
I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
Hundreds of people showed up on the steps of the state capitol to protest. These boxes contained the petitions for the governor. Hollywood star Johnny Depp was alongside former Arkansas death row inmate Damian Eccles. Everyone here said Arkansas should abolish the death penalty.
I'm here today because my brother, Frankie Parker, was killed on August 8, 1996. He was on death row for almost 12 years.
Cher Parker is from Gentry. She says she was forever changed when her brother was put to death for murder.
I feel like justice can be served by giving the men life without parole, letting them spend the rest of their life thinking about what they did.
This son is a man who was innocent, but they went ahead and convicted him anyway. It speaks for itself. And this is the same circumstance here.
And a spokesperson for Governor Asa Hutchinson told me that the petitions will not impact the governor's decision to carry on with the scheduled executions. In Little Rock, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
Make sure you stay with us. Coming up tonight at 6 o'clock, we're going to hear Brett's one-on-one interview with Damian Eccles, one of the West Memphis 3, about his time on death row before he was freed.
Well, we have seen uproar and protests like these across the area as we inch closer and closer to the execution of the first of the 7 inmates. Executions which do have the possibility of being halted last minute. 4029's Katie Davidson is live for us now to explain. Katie.
Well, people gathered here at the Washington County Courthouse again today to protest the scheduled execution of 7 men. But up until Monday night at about 7 o'clock, we have no way of knowing if those executions will actually be carried out. We know the first 2 inmates scheduled for execution, Don Davis and Bruce Ward, have already had attorneys asked to block their executions while the Supreme Court hears a relevant case. But even if that attempt fails, Professor of Law Brian Galini says they have several other options to try to keep their clients out of the death chamber.
I think we can first expect a batch of last-minute appellate efforts to save the inmates' lives. And there is a chance, doesn't necessarily mean it'll happen, but there's a chance that those would be successful.
Galini hinted at 2 specific issues that may stop these executions from taking place. First, the secrecy behind where the drug cocktail comes from.
Does that person have a right to know on an individual rights basis what drugs are going to be used to kill him? Right now, the answer is no.
He also said it's unprecedented that one lawyer would be responsible for representing 3 death row inmates where there's so much last-minute work.
So can we feel assured that that person, that lawyer, is being put in a position to adequately serve that client in the hour where the client needs them the most?
Galini believes the issues and the nature of the schedule of the executions could lead to some unprecedented actions from the United States Supreme Court.
If we're playing the percentages, we would imagine they won't get involved, just based on history. However, again, we go back to it being unprecedented. I'm certainly I'm not willing to say that those low percentages apply here, and it wouldn't shock me if the U.S. Supreme Court got involved.
Well, Galini says the governor also has the option to make the last-minute call to halt these executions, but based on his previous public statements, he believes that's not likely to happen. Live in Fayetteville, I'm Katie Davidson, 4029 News.
All right, Katie, and originally there were 8 inmates, if you remember, set for execution, but a judge blocked the execution of Jason McGehee, which means that his execution is now on a 30-day delay.
If the state's timeline goes forward as planned, 7 death row inmates would be executed before May 1st, and that would start on Monday with Don Davis and Bruce Ward set to undergo lethal injection. And then just 3 days later, the state would put to death convicted killers Stacy Johnson and Liddell Lee. Then on Monday, April 24th, Jack Jones and Marcel Williams' executions are scheduled. Finally, 3 days later, the 7th and final death row inmate is scheduled, Kenneth Williams. 4029 News, of course, going to be bringing you continuing coverage as Arkansas prepares for these planned executions. So make sure you stay close to 4029tv.com this weekend. We will bring you any new developments.
As we just told you, the execution of Liddell Lee has been delayed by the Circuit Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court is involved as well. Several legal challenges have been discussed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Lee is being represented by the Innocence Project and ACLU lawyers.
And our Brett Rains live for us at the Cummins unit in Grady, where the execution of Liddell Lee could begin in just moments. Brett, what's it like out there?
Well, we can tell you that right now, the life of death row inmate Liddell Lee rests entirely with the United States Supreme Court. This after the U.S. 8th Circuit Court of Appeals cleared the way for Lee to be executed. Now take a look at Lee's picture. He's been on death row since 1995 after being convicted for murdering a 26-year-old Pulaski County woman by beating her to death with a small club. And we're told that right now the full U.S. Supreme Court is reviewing Lee's case. Right now, that's the only court that has a stay of his execution. And we can tell you earlier today, spokespersons here at the prison tell us, Lee was offered a final meal, which he refused.
Earlier this afternoon, Liddell Lee received as his last meal request communion.
And the prison granted that request, only giving death row inmate Lee communion as he requested. The prison says they did offer him a tray meal like every other inmate got tonight, but that the death row inmate refused it. Now, Stacy Johnson was also scheduled to be executed tonight, but after 6 o'clock, we learned that the Attorney General was not appealing tonight his stay of execution. As we come back live, we can tell you again right now, the United States Supreme Court is reviewing Lee's case. There's no time frame when they could release their decision. But if they lift the stay of execution, then the U.S. Supreme Court will notify the state attorney general, who will notify Governor Hutchinson, who will then notify the Department of Correction, and soon after, Lee will be put to death. And even though it's minutes past 10 o'clock, we can tell you that the death warrant that was signed by Governor Hutchinson is valid until midnight. Live in Grady, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
Okay, and again, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewing that stay right now. The next 4 executions in Arkansas are set for Monday and next Thursday. Breaking right now, the U.S. Supreme Court has denied all requests for the stay of execution for Arkansas death row inmate Liddell Lee.
That's right. The U.S. Supreme Court ruling just moments ago, meaning that the execution will go forward. 4029's Brett Rains is live outside the Cummins unit there where the execution will take place. Brett?
Well, we can tell you that a prison spokesperson tells me that right now the process is underway to carry out the execution of death row inmate Liddell Lee. And as we mentioned just moments ago, the Supreme Court lifted its stay, stopping the execution. As soon as that was lifted, a spokesperson for the governor made the announcement. And then the spokesperson for the prison said the process will begin immediately to execute Liddell Lee. Now we know that right now, Lee is being led into the death chamber here at the Cummins unit, where an IV will be administered. After that, the combination of deadly drugs will be given to Lee that will take his life. The prison did not say exactly how long it will be until Lee is pronounced dead. Live in Grady, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
Of course, Brett, we do know the death warrant runs out at midnight, so they're up against the clock.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just to recap here, the U.S. Supreme Court denying all stay of execution requests for Arkansas inmate Liddell Lee. And as Brett just mentioned, the execution will go forward. He's being escorted to the execution chamber as we speak. That
is right. Stay with 4029 News and 4029tv.com for the latest information on this case. We'll continue to update you throughout the evening and then tomorrow.
You're watching Breaking News on 4029.
And breaking news from overnight, just hours ago, an inmate was executed after spending more than 2 decades on death row. 4029's Brett Rains was at the Cummins prison unit as the execution took place minutes before the death warrant expired.
At 11:56 Thursday night, convicted murderer Liddell Lee was pronounced dead. He'd been on death row since 1995, convicted for beating to death a 26-year-old woman in Pulaski County. He was also linked to 3 unsolved rapes and another rape and murder. Eventually, the Supreme Court lifted its stay of execution on Lee at approximately 11:30. At 11:44, prison officials administered the lethal drugs that would claim his life. People who witnessed the execution said it did not appear that Lee experienced any pain.
I could tell that his chest was moving slightly, appeared to still be breathing for the first few minutes, and then at the consciousness check, he didn't show any signs of consciousness.
Tonight, that justice was carried out, and the families have closure. It's the first time they've been able to say that since 1993.
Witnesses said that Lee did not make any statements before he was put to death. His last meal was refused by Lee. The prison said he only asked for communion, which was given to him. Also, we know that the victim's family members were here at the Cummins unit. They did not want to make any public statements, as well as Lee's defense attorney who was here. He also did not talk to the media. In Grady, Brett Rains, 4029 News.
After the execution was announced, Attorney General Leslie Rutledge released a statement saying, in part, "I pray this lawful execution helps bring closure for the Reese family. Read my full statement following tonight's execution." Well, the state says that it plans to push forward with plans for 4 other executions. And as we've mentioned, there are several legal challenges affecting Arkansas's plan to execute its death row inmates. These challenges involve concerns over the lethal injection drugs, question over evidence, and inmates' access to mental health experts. Some of these cases have gone and reached the U.S. Supreme Court. For an in-depth look at all the legal challenges, just head to our website, 4029tv.com. Well, just hours ago, death row inmate Kenneth Williams was executed.
It happened after the United States Supreme Court rejected pleas for a stay, and new this morning. 4029's Brett Raines bringing us reaction from family members of one of the convicted killer's victims.
In October 1999, Cecil Bourne lived just a few miles away from this prison. But when Kenneth Williams escaped, the farmer and former deputy warden was shot multiple times and murdered. More than 17 years after his death, Bourne's daughters spoke out about Williams being executed.
It's not closure, it's just we don't endure this. We don't have to endure this anymore.
We feel justice has been served.
It's complete.
Finally.
I did witness the execution. Kenneth Williams showed no change in his facial expression to exhibit any form of pain. Any amount of movement that he might have had was far less than any of his victims.
In his last words before he died, Williams said that he was not the same person that he was and that he was changed when he gave his life to Christ and he sought forgiveness. Then, witnesses say Williams spoke in tongues. In Varner, Brett Raines, 4029 News.
Williams was convicted of murdering 4 people, including the shooting of UA Pine Bluff cheerleader Dominique Hurd. Attorney General Leslie Rutledge releasing a statement after the execution, saying in part, quote, "Tonight the rule of law was upheld as the family of Cecil Bourne saw justice done. I pray the lawful execution will bring closure and peace to the Bourne family." And Arkansas originally planned to execute 8 death row inmates in 11 days before its supply of midazolam expires on Sunday. That's one of the state's lethal injection drugs. Well, we also know that the company that makes midazolam will not make it anymore, so no future executions have been set.
4 of those 8 inmates received stays or delays of execution. Liddell Lee was the first inmate to be executed last Thursday after his execution was allowed to go forward following a U.S. Supreme Court ruling. On Monday, both Jack Jones and Marcel Williams were put to death.